Hello everyone! Welcome to the Hidden Truths, a place where we will explore scenarios, histories, and truths hidden from public view. This series is going to be very irregular due in part due to the effort required to get such information compiled. Milk vs. Blood, in particular, was made and compiled by Cirnosad, who requested I put it to video format. Without him, this would not have been done as fast as it did. Without further ado, let's dig in. It is a unique tale with almost fantastic connections you may never thought were possible. We will dive into two opposing species of mysterious origins and the ultimate destiny of our planet. Let us begin with the Reds and their Emperor Mayor Rothschild and his future descendants. The name Rothschild was in fact given to him and meant Red Shield. Rothschild was a Khazarian claiming to be Jewish. In fact, he was a hybrid of the pure Khazarian stock, but never mind that for now. The Rothschild family first appeared in Germany 250 to 300 years prior to Mayer's ascendance to dominance via usury. 350 years earlier, in the 10th century, Prince of Kiev Sviatoslav the Brave destroyed the Khazar Empire in today's Ukraine, and they fled to Europe, where they mixed with the Ashkenazims. 100 years prior to their appearance, a Germanic tale had spread throughout the continent, telling of an apocalypse started by a demonic people, the Red Jews, who would invade Europe and destroy Christendom, leading to the events of the apocalypse, also known as Revelations. The story would start far, far away from our areas, somewhere beyond the mountains of darkness, on the other side of the Sambeton River. There lives a nation known as the Red Jews. This, in fact, corresponds to both Khazaria and Gog and Magog from the Romance of Alexandria. Namely, north of Sambetion River happens to be the city of Ashkenaz, where defeated Jews, actual Jews, were routed by the Assyrian Empire, and north yet is a special location, the Daniel Gorge, in modern-day Georgia. This was the southern extent of the Khazarian Empire. Along the Daniel Gorge, Alexander the Great was said to seek God's help in building a gate to contain the satanic peoples of Gog and Magog, later conflated with the Scythians by many authors, away from the rest of humanity. These would later become the Khazars and are mentioned in Revelations. Naturally, the Germans saw the rise of the Khazars, disguised as Ashkenazi Jews, as a bad sign, associating them directly with Gog and Magog. But a curious thing occurs as well, so-called blood libel. Europe saw an accusation never before leveled against the Jewish people. Along the Dariel Gorge. Oh, wrong way. Back to the topic of the Rothschilds. Him and his associated Red Jew bankers would gain a lot of power, funding wars between Christian nations, funding the ends of monarchies, and so on. This is a well-known. One case that deserves close attention is the Russian Revolution. In this war, depicted as a war between a Red Army, funded by the Rothschild associate Jacob Schiff, and a White Army, supported by no one but the patriotic Russians themselves. By the end of the war, the entire family of the White Emperor was savagely murdered by the Red Jew. As the dust settles of this disastrous war, the Reds revealed themselves. They comprised 80% of what became the Soviet government, as revealed by even Putin himself. They would later commit the Red Terror, committing up to 1.3 million Christians and starving 10 million more. In Europe, after two catastrophic world wars, the Reds also seemed to dominate. Perched up on the eastern coast of the United States banking capital, New York City, they were untouchable. and later took that nation over too. By the US's hands, tens of millions of people were butchered. But these direct deaths pale in comparison to the systematic genocide practiced by the Reds against the Whites. Using feminism, mass migration, a debt-based economy gone wild, miscegenation media, Whites have all but seemingly stopped producing babies and are seemingly about to disappear. Or are we? Who are we exactly? We spoke at length about the mysterious origin of the Reds and narrowed it down to the legend of Gog and Magog. Let us take a turn to the Whites, and why these Reds are not Israelis at all. To do that, we're gonna have to return to the Rothschild family, specifically Lord Rothschild. Lord Rothschild is known for the Balfour Declaration, in which the British government would promise to hand over Palestine to the Zionists, written in 1917, a year before the end of World War I. The Reds, in a predictable pattern, would later flood Palestine and commit one of the worst genocides in history, called the Nakba. But here's something you probably didn't know. The same Rothschilds would address the British government a second and final time, asking for raw milk to be banned and for pasteurization to be enforced. This was certainly not a decent man. His nefarious means and ends prove it. So what exactly is the agenda here? Why Palestine when the world was theirs? And why target something so common like milk? One of the key strengths of white people lies in their ability to drink milk and digest it effectively, thanks to the persistence of lactase enzymes in their body, something of a majority of the world lacks. Important note, this map, it is flawed. No data really exists for the Levant. Meanwhile, 75% of the Reds are lactose intolerant. Milk does not work well with them. Pasteurization, pushed by Lord Rothschild, destroys the lactase in milk, most beneficial microbiome, and turns the milk into, essentially, a poison that promotes many diseases. The banning of real, raw milk turns an advantage into a huge disadvantage for the white people. Yet, there is an interesting symbolism many would miss if they do not know the history of the world. Let us take a quick look at farming in the Middle East, where Armageddon is currently near. 1,000 years after a global catastrophe struck our planet, marked by the Younger Dryas, people emerged out of the mountain ranges and immediately started farming on the surface. As evidence will show, they had cattle and drank milk from them, as reliefs and drawings depicted. Surviving the hardships of an event that destroys much of the surface and forces people underground necessitates a source of food that is high in nutrients while not requiring much in terms of precursor ingredients. The humble cow or goat is the perfect instrument for such a requirement, grass to milk. It is no wonder that these survivors were precisely the kind of people who could sustain themselves on raw milk alone. As conditions improved, they moved towards more and more arable soil in the rich continent of Europe, the origin of the white man and his white fuel milk. The curiosity doesn't end there. The Reds are about to go to war with Lebanon. Are you aware of the origin of its name? It means milky and white. Most people attribute this to the snowy Lebanese mountains, but this is only, in fact, half the story. Lebanon, as we call it today, and in fact as we called it in ancient times, is named as such from the Phoenician language. LBN, the trilateral root word for milky white. It is also the root word of Laban, the yogurt of the same color, and the curiosity doesn't end there. You see, the Phoenician language, Aramaic, Hebrew, which is bastardized Arabic, which is corrupted Aramaic, Greek and Latin are really the same script and root language, morphed over a long period of time and space. Observe the chart connection here. Phoenician is the fourth column. In the case of the Hebrew language, there is another interesting connection. In the second half of Genesis, we learn about Jacob's, later Israel's, genealogy. His mother was from Aram, and from a family named Laban. He was then told to marry from the same Laban family. LBN being the root word for Rachel's family won't be a surprise to any of you, as she was extremely white like milk, which is where her name came from. Aram, now Damascus, was a land of the Amorites, a very tall, white, blonde-haired, and light-colored-eyed people. Unfortunately for Jacob, Laban's father tricked him to marry off. Such a precious young child as his got him to work for 14 years. Then he demanded that he stayed in Aram and not take Rachel with him. This created a family conflict that ended with the most fateful resolution. Jacob and Laban make a covenant of separation and peace. Jacob must never marry over Rachel and must never mistreat her, but also must stay separated from Laban's land. Some debate exists as to where the separation point is, but it is likely near the Sea of Galilee. It is south of this point that Israel, the ancient Israel that predates Moses, as he spoke of it, named after Jacob, whose children were 75% Amorite and thus white, likely blue-eyed, and blonde, lived. Note that these children of Israel were not Jews, a subset of Judea's children. The reported and logically consistent appearance of the Israelites was in sharp contrast to the general deformed appearance of the Reds, i.e. Gog and Magog. We will come back to their true origin, but the main point here is these people have no connection to ancient Israel. So we will leave expanding on this for another time, but to bring us back to the previous, it is said that the global catastrophe happened, one that resulted in most of this destruction of most of humanity. Many different species would differentiate out of it. These species do not necessarily have to be focused in the Levant, from which we know this cycle of civilization spread from. There may have been survivors of a similar type of people elsewhere. This map of lactase persistence lends us a huge hint. It radiates out of Britain. But we know the Phoenicians or their predecessors carried by a white bull, spread civilization across the Mediterranean. England doesn't really show up on this map at all. In fact, it is widely known that Phoenicians set up shop in Cornwall to mine tin. But is that it? In fact, even the name Britain comes from the Phoenician Baratenic, meaning the land of tin. As we would discover, there's a lot more. There are artifacts, coins, monuments, and inscriptions all over the island, all with a Phoenician or unique Brit-Phoenician origin. But the curiosity does not end there. Remember how Lebanon's root trilateral is LBN, meaning white and milky? Britain was not the only name for the island. It was also known as Albion, with the same trilateral, LBN. Modern historians claim both Lebanon and Albion were named based upon observations of the land's formations. In England's case, some rock formation by the sea. As we see in the examples of Israel, Aram, and more, land is always named after people, not formations. It also means white, by the way. You have probably never encountered any of this, but for a time, this was one of the most popular concepts in Albion, to the point where it was commonly accepted among intellectuals that England held the original Israelites. This isn't quite right, but we'll get to that. The most important thing to note is the connection between the white milk and cow down to the bull, and the origin of Europe, England, and its connections to the ancient world. From language to food to names, many deep right roots connect Europe from England to the Phoenician coasts. Today, the Reds conveniently associate not only the Levant people, and most recently Gazans, with their most hated foe, Amalek, they also associated it with all of white people. which makes sense when you consider all of the above connections. They are one and the same. One final important note we looked at, the origin of words a lot, but what exactly does Amalek mean? It has two alternative meanings. One, people of impressive feats, or two, giants. Throughout the Torah, Moses' men went around genociding giants. Quite interestingly, a corrupted origin story of Albion appeared in the 12th century, positing that the island was discovered by a Trojan kind of Brutus, and he discovered that the island was occupied by giants. He went on genociding them, and the last ones killed was named Gog Magog. This corruption was introduced by Geoffrey of Monmouth, who also corrupted the story of King Arthur. I don't want to get into that just yet, but it's important to note the lie reveals itself from his story. His claim that Britain was named after Brutus. We know it comes from Baratanic. The result of this corruption are two statues named Gog and Magog that stand in the Guildhall of the City of London, the seat of power of the Reds. Albion's land was conquered, then used to attack its origin in the Levant. Next we will return to food, milk, and destiny, but for now, we shall have to call it here. As you can see, there are a lot of things to unpack in the Hidden Truths. And if it weren't for Cirnosad, a lot of this would not have been able to be coalesced properly. There's a lot of jumping around between different sources of information. Connecting points that really don't have good connecting points unless you have a wide view of history. But in any case, I hope you all enjoyed this episode of Hidden Truths. We will continue next time and try and finish out Milk versus Blood. But it will take some time. I hope you all enjoyed. Bye-bye, everyone!